Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today has been a full-time personal trainer since 1994 and also occasionally worked as a bouncer and served in the military. He's authored numerous instructional books and self-defense videos, is the owner of one of the oldest martial arts and self-defense blogs on the internet, and is also a fellow podcaster. He's been training in martial arts for almost 40 years. Please welcome our guest today, joining us all the way from Brussels, Mr. Wim Demeere. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you for having me, Brian.
Good. Hey, I appreciate you taking the time. I know with the time difference, it can get tricky sometimes, and glad we were able to work it out.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It was just a little bit of a crazy day today, but I'm glad we managed to figure it out.
Oh, me too. How we like to kick it off with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning, and I just want to know kind of what kicked off your martial arts journey. Where did that first spark come from, and what led to your first interest in martial arts?
Well, I always had this interest just watching, movies and the old Kung Fu TV series and then the Bruce Lee movies and so on that were showing on TV. And then by accident, one of my childhood friends, he started training judo and jiu-jitsu and asked if I was interested. And I was like, well, I'll give it a try. And that basically was the beginning of the journey. This was traditional jiu-jitsu. It wasn't BJJ as we know it now.
Okay.
So it's very different.
Japanese then?
Yes. And I started doing that, went all the way up to orange belt, which is not all that far.
Mm-hmm.
But then a chance encounter. I was at a fair in the neighborhood, and was just by chance one of the guys who was also in the judo and jiu-jitsu class said like, hey, there's this guy doing a Kung Fu demonstration. I was like, oh, I'll take a look. So I go over and look, and I was very much impressed by who would then become my teacher in traditional Kung Fu. They were doing these pre-rehearsed demos of like you'd see in the Jackie Chan movies and all that kind of stuff. And remember, folks, this was a very long time ago, so things were different then. But he would do things like, do full-on falls on concrete and things like that. That knowing from judo how hard it is to take a fall like that, I was like, wow. And he would bounce right back up.
Wow. Later
on, I would do these demos as well with him, and I learned that he was not pulling punches. So one time in the demo, I tried to evade the incoming technique the wrong way because I was not fully focused enough, and he just spinning back kicked me in the face.
Ooh,
so,
okay.
That was not a good day.
No. So I want to back up just a little bit to the jiu-jitsu. You said you only went into orange belt. Now, did you get into the competition at all at that time, or?
No, there wasn't really a competition back then.
Okay.
I mean, nowadays traditional jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu over here, they have competitions where it's mostly showing techniques and so on, and showing combinations, and so it stays more technical, not really the sparring aspect or the ground grappling.
Okay.
I mean, it might exist now, but I haven't seen it yet.
Right.
And there wasn't really that. And judo, I wasn't really interested at that point in time in competitions. I was also very young. I was 13, so I wasn't really into it.
So you made the switch, from jiu-jitsu and judo to Kung Fu. What was that like? What was those first few classes? Just, what was your mind thinking? Obviously, it was a completely different art, different techniques and stuff. So what was kind of going through your mind those first few classes when you made that switch?
That I was woefully out of shape. I was very strong for my age because I had to work construction as a child. So that wasn't the issue, but we would do 2-hour classes.
Oh, wow.
And the first hour was what my teacher would call warm-up, but that was actually conditioning. So we would do running, jumping jacks, rolling, and a bunch of stuff. Hundreds and hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups and all that kind of stuff. So by the end of that first hour, you were pretty much very tired. And then the class would start. And my teacher was old school, so it didn't matter how warm it was in class. No drinking allowed. So you couldn't drink a sip of water, which I later learned that was very unhealthy, but that was how it was. And back then we would train in this former factory, which meant that we were just underneath the roof. And in winter it was freezing cold, and in summer it was blazing hot. So, but back then there wasn't that much choice. So you just went where you could find somebody who was teaching.
Right.
And that's what I did. And I very quickly found out that, well, my judo and jiu-jitsu hadn't really prepared me for that.
So
and my teacher, my kung fu teacher, was also a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So he had studied that before. So it's not like he didn't know, he couldn't compare or anything. It's just that it was a very different style,
right.
A very different way of training. All of a sudden I had to learn forms. Had to do different kinds of partner work and so on. So that took a little bit of an adjustment.
Okay. And which style of Kung Fu was it?
It's called a Hung Cha Pai, and it's closely related to Hung Gar. It gets to be very, very difficult sometimes to trace back lineages and so on. But when I say Hung Gar, the Hung Gar people get a little bit upset if I say that. So please don't hold me to it. But for the audience listening who is familiar with that, it would closely resemble that in spirit and, let's say, style of techniques. For instance, to Wing Chun, it would be radically different.
Okay.
You wouldn't compare it to that at all.
Right. And how long did you stay involved with that system and that school?
I have to think back because it's been a while.
Mm-hmm.
It was well over 10 years. I think about 13 or 14 years, but I'm not sure anymore because it's I'm 51 now. So as I get older, I start having to look up stuff like, okay, when did I do that? And so on.
Yep, I know. I know the feeling. I'm 49, so I know the feeling. So then, now you've studied many other styles. Now, did you leave Kung Fu for another style, or did you start training another style at the same time you were training Kung Fu? Did you start cross training?
Well, I started training in traditional Tai Chi Chuan by accident again. So as a personal trainer, I would work out in a gym near the company that one of my clients had, and we would do strength and conditioning. And then like the last 20, 30 minutes, we would do some martial arts and sparring, and we would go to the back room to the aerobics hall there. And the owner saw what we were doing. I mean, obviously I checked with him and we rented the room with him. So that was all fine. And he's like, oh, you do martial arts? I said, yes, I do Kung Fu and blah, blah, blah. And he said, oh, we've got this guy doing Tai Chi here. I was like, yeah, but that's for old people. And he says, no. These guys fight. I'm like, okay, that sounds interesting because what did I know, right? Mm-hmm. So I checked out the class, and it was very different from the traditional style that I was practicing. The body mechanics were very different kinds of techniques. But most of all, we did pushing hands. And pushing hands it's hard to describe because there's different kinds, but you could think of it as stand-up grappling. Mm-hmm. There's different variations. And in one exercise, it's called freestyle pushing hands. The goal is you're standing face-to-face with your partner. You both are in the same lead. You can do your stance wide or narrow. You can be tall or low. Doesn't matter. You can pick. And then the goal is using grappling techniques, pushing, pulling, and so on, to break the balance of your partner. Wow. And you have to stay standing. You're not allowed to step or move. Mm-hmm. So if you both fall, nobody gets a point, so to speak. It's very different from the regular grappling that people are used to. Mm-hmm. There's different kinds where you are allowed to move and step, but this one is called fixed step, so you're not allowed to step. I was faced with one of the students who'd been there for a few years, and he was almost half my size. I'm a heavyweight, so I'm a big guy. And he would just break my balance with ease. And the harder I tried to push him over or pull him off balance, the more I fell to the ground. So that was an eye-opening experience for me. Mm-hmm. And at first, my ego was a little bit bruised, but I very quickly came to the conclusion that if this guy, who's almost half my size, can do this to a guy like me, what would I be able to do if I can only be as good as this guy? He's not even a teacher. Teacher's much better. If I can get to that level, what could I do to guys my size then? And then it kind of clicked, and I discovered this system that is very versatile and that allows you a lot of freedom in how you combine techniques and principles and so on. So it very much clicked with me. It it was just something that I discovered, like, okay, this is a good fit for who I am, how I like to train, kind of techniques that I like to do, and so on.
And it was different enough that it didn't affect your traditional Kung Fu training. So,
well, that was that became an issue after a while.
Oh,
so
damn.
I started training very hard in that Tai Chi style, and because the body mechanics were radically different, it conflicted.
Oh, okay.
So I had to make a choice, and I made a choice to stop with the traditional Kung Fu style that I was teaching and training in for so long, because it just wasn't compatible. And there was some other stuff there as well, that, certain techniques and things that I had trouble with, that I thought were not. This is true in all styles, in my opinion, that you discover things that are like, okay, this doesn't make perfect sense to me, or the explanation is that I got is, I'm not 100% convinced. And this has to do with my own experience with violence and so on. So everybody's different in that, and every style has its own little thing. And I found that just, a little bit of a sidetrack here, but in pretty much any system or combat art that I studied, I found that there are some inconsistencies here and there are things that you as an individual might go like, okay, this doesn't work for me. Doesn't mean it doesn't work for anybody. Might be that it works for some of your students who are of a different build, younger than you, older than you, doesn't matter. So I think it's very rare that you find a style where every single thing you're like, okay, this is great. This is top notch. This is 100%. I'm sure it exists, but I'm very critical of myself to begin with,
right?
But also of all the arts that I train in. And I don't think any system is perfect, but that's just a very personal opinion, and people are free to disagree with me on that.
Right.
Back to the story, I discovered that the incompatibilities were too great, and I had to make a choice. And I found that Chi suited me better, but it also was something that I saw that this has a longer shelf life. I can do this until I'm older, whereas the Kung Fu style, definitely not. I mean, that was a young man's art. And a lot of the training was very, very harsh. A lot of focus on conditioning and toughening up your arms and legs and so on, so that, a lot of hard contact and pretty much no rules sparring without protective gear.
Wow.
So that is kind of stuff that I think in the long run, you can't really keep up into your 50s, 60s and beyond. It becomes very counterproductive. So I made a switch to Tai Chi, and that's what I've been teaching for the past, almost 25 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then you've also mixed in other styles, and those ones you've managed to keep training Tai Chi while training other styles. So what was the next style you picked up?
Well, I have to, again, a little bit of a sidetrack. While I was already doing the traditional Kung Fu, I started competing full contact when I was about, I think, 18 years old. And that was, it's called Kinda, which is kind of like Kyokushinkai, which is, you're basically almost bare knuckled. You're allowed to punch and kick, and sometimes, depending on the rule set of the competition, knee strikes as well. Throwing, sweeping is allowed, no ground fighting, but no punches to the head, which is very annoying. But that's what it was like. So I started with that, did a bunch of competitions with that, and then eventually got into Sanda or Sanshou, which is the Chinese version of kickboxing, which does allow punches to the head, and is particularly interested in throwing techniques in which you stay standing. And the particularity of that kind of format is that you fight on a platform. Imagine a boxing ring, but no ropes.
Oh, wow.
And if you fall or get pushed or kicked or whatever off the platform twice in one round, you lose the round. So, and that appealed to me because it had the environmental aspect that you find in self-defense, which is so critical. That played a huge role, much, much more than when I went to boxing gyms, Muay Thai and kickboxing gyms as well, did all that training too. But that, leaning into the ropes was not an option for us. So it became much more important to look at your footwork and understand where you are on the fight surface. Is how much more can I back up before I run into trouble? And how am I going to circle around this guy or cut an angle to make sure that he ends up in a worse position closer to the edge of the platform than I am? So it's a very different way of thinking as a combat sport. And I did that for a while. So that was a big part of it. And because, again, this is a long time ago, there wasn't that much of a choice of training venues. So I would go to Muay Thai and kickboxing gyms to train because there were those where guys were fighting full contact as well. And the rule set was relatively similar, though not completely. And then a big part of the other styles that I studied was Southeast Asian styles. So some Kali, Silat, and then Kuntao. Spend a fair amount training with that as well. And then a bunch of different self-defense systems from different people, which is what we see nowadays, more like instructors develop their own self-defense system and so on. So I would cross-train with a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And for a while now, I've had my own small little training group, private training group, that I've been working with for several years. And we just experiment a lot.
Okay. So when you're teaching now, you're not just teaching one style, you're blending, you're using what works.
Well, when I'm teaching, it depends. So I have my own class that I teach twice a week. Mm-hmm. And first hour and a half, it's Tai Chi, so the style that I've been practicing for so long. And the second hour and a half, which is different students, obviously, I teach MMA.
Okay.
So I transitioned a while ago, and why, for several reasons. Again, Sancho as a sport. Again, there was always a limitation because you weren't allowed to do a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I always found that very annoying. And then when many years ago, mixed martial arts came onto the scene, I was like, okay, this is much freer now. You're allowed to do so much more, especially in the beginning. Now there's more rule sets, more techniques are no longer allowed. And that's fine. There's more than enough that you can do in the sport of MMA. So I was drawn to that more, so I started training in that a little bit and eventually began teaching it as well.
Very cool. So think back then to all the way back to Kung Fu when you first started teaching to now. What do you think has changed the most about your teaching style over the years?
If I compare to that era, it's mostly that I teach now much wider than how I wanted to train. Back then, I was much more strict with students, and I set a very high standard, or let's say a much higher standard, the same standard than I would set for myself, and I would expect them to try to keep up. Obviously, understanding that not everybody had the same physical traits or mindset, but just like, okay, we're here to train, and we want to train hard. Whereas nowadays, I'm more along the lines of, okay, everybody has his own reasons to train. I don't discriminate. I will give whatever the student I think will be able to absorb and push that student to the intensity level that I think they can work with. And if I'm wrong, we can dial it back a little bit and take it down a notch. And if they can keep up, we can pick up the pace a little bit more and so on. So it's much more tailored to the students in particular. And at the same time, I have come to accept, I guess maybe a little bit of wisdom got into my brain over the years, is that, okay, not everybody trains the same way that I want to train for the same goals. So now it's much more, look, I will, for instance, give a student like, okay, if you want to advance, here's a drill that you should maybe practice do it every day for 5 minutes for a week or two. And you will make very, very, very quick and fundamental progress because it will fix something specific that you're struggling with right now. And if they do it, I tell them, okay, it's great you did it. Now I can show you the next thing. If they don't do it, I will say it again. But I'm like, look, you don't have to do it for me. And I'm perfectly fine repeating the same correction to you over and over. I just think it's going to be frustrating for you. So maybe it would be better if you actually do the drill that I'm suggesting. But if you don't, that's fine. It's just that I can't show you the next thing because it's built upon the thing that you right now are having trouble with. So it's a little bit vague, but to make it a little bit more concrete, let's say that you're in a specific stance and you need to be able to align your support foot and your support knee while you do a hip rotation. Okay. Many people, when they practice, students will have trouble keeping the knee aligned with the foot, and they put torque on their knee, which eventually will cause problems with the knee and could have meniscus tears and so on. That you run into. So to avoid that, and also to make sure you develop good body mechanics, it is imperative that they learn to control that alignment of the knee over the foot. And I have specific drills that I can give them to practice at home that work specifically on that. And once they have sufficient control, everything else becomes easier because they fixed the fundamental body mechanics problem that they were having. And I know that this is the first step in what comes after, is that if they can do that, then they can learn the next thing, which will improve their body mechanics. But if they can't even keep that knee aligned, the structure that they're supposed to be building with their body is just not there. It's not strong enough to withstand some of the pressure that it should be able to withstand later on. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Completely. Yes. I like that. That's really good. Now, you've been a personal trainer since 1994. Now, do you find yourself using some of your martial arts training with your personal training clients?
Yeah, so my personal training started basically out of the Kung Fu class that I was teaching. A few people asked for private lessons, and that basically got out of hand, and I made it my job. So I started with the martial arts training, and then because I was competing back in the day, I did so much conditioning that I had a fair amount of knowledge about that myself. So people started asking me for that as well. And over the years, I've tried to keep up with the developments in sports science, obviously, and been training. Let's say it changes from year to year, but overall, I would say about half the personal training clients that I have, it's something to do with martial arts or self-defense or combat sports, and the other half is strength conditioning, health, weight loss, and related, so fitness related.
Okay. When did the idea for the blog start, and how long has that been going on?
I think it was in 1997, wow, if I'm not mistaken. So a long time. The internet was new, and I just wanted to do something with the internet because back then, I mean, for now, people look at the internet like, of course it's there, but it didn't used to be like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a dial-up modem, for Christ's sake. It was just
I had one on my Commodore 64 in 1986.
All right, so you know what we're talking about.
I know.
And I was like, okay, just want to try this. And remember that there were big journals and newspapers writing articles like, yeah, that internet thing, it's already over. It's not going to last. Don't put your money into it and so on. Mm-hmm. That literally is what they were saying back then. So, and I was like, I want to try something. And my ISP back in the day gave, I think it was like 10 megabytes of web space.
That's huge.
Eventually gave 50.
Nice.
And what's it called again? AOL Press is the first software that I used that would allow you to make HTML pages. And then you had to manually upload them to the web space that you had. And I did basically a website in which I did book reviews, video reviews, and VHS tapes, because that was what we had back then. Mm-hmm. Wrote some articles, did some interviews and so on, just because I just wanted to do something on the internet. I'm a little bit of a nerd. So that was, I had fun doing that, mm-hmm, and got in touch with a bunch of authors that I was reading their books anyway, like Mark McYoung, Lauren Christensen, and so on. So I would ask them like, hey, can I do a book review of yours? And this is how long ago that was, but because everybody was figuring out what the etiquette would be on the internet. And I would actually ask and email these people. I was like, is it okay if I put a link to your website on my website? So nowadays things are very different. So yes, that's when I started. And then for a variety of reasons, I stopped working on that website for a while. And then all of a sudden blogging came in. And one of the main reasons why I stopped is that the software that you needed, the technical expertise you needed to make a good website, that was just beyond me. And then WordPress came along and blogs came along, and a lot of the problems that I had on the technical front, they just went away.
Right.
It was just automated and it worked quite well. And I was like, okay, let me try a blog. And that's been going, for a long time now. I'd have to look it up, but at least 15 years, if it's not 20.
Okay.
And still doing that.
Now, the original one you had, is any of that stuff still out there? The one from back in 97?
No, I have it archived somewhere on a hard disk. But pretty much all that stuff is like, a lot of it is just about videos that are no longer available, like VHS tapes that just don't exist anymore. And some of the articles in hindsight, they were not that great. I was just learning to write. So
right.
If you write, or if you make instructional videos, that the first thing you do, it sounds like a great idea in your head. And then you put it on paper or on video and they're like, okay, this is crap. This is not good. But I still have all that stuff again saved on a hard drive. But
that's good. I wish I
it's a good place to keep it.
I know I built my first ever website in, I think it was 99, 2000 through when Tripod first launched. If you remember Tripod, they used to give like free websites. And
oh, right. No, right. I do remember.
Yeah.
Right.
And the funny part is I just like 6 months ago, I was bored and looked it up, and the website's still, like, I can't access it anymore, but the website is still there. And I'm like, wow, that's bad.
Yeah. No, I used Dreamweaver back in the day after a while.
I remember that. I'm
It's
trying to
still
remember the program I
needed to-
used. Yeah, there was one. It was something magic, like magic HTML or something like that. I think that my friend gave me, and that's what I used to build my first site.
Yeah, there were so many back in the day, and some were good, some were like, okay,
Horrible.
you still needed to have a lot of HTML coding skills, and I just didn't have those.
Yeah. See, at least you archived and saved everything. I wish, like, I started in radio when I was 15, and I wish I had recordings of a lot of like my radio shows and some of my interviews and reviews and stuff. And I have a handful from the late 90s, but I started in radio in 89.
Wow.
And a lot of that stuff I just did. I think 2000 was the first time I started actually like recording it, because the radio station I worked at had a CD burner built in, so you could record your shows. So I went and bought a bunch of blank CDs and started recording all my shows back then. But anything before that, I had none of that, none of the commercials I did or anything. And I wish I did. So then how about, I'm assuming writing the blog, that kind of led to you writing books, or were the books first?
The blog was already started. No, the blog wasn't started. It was still on my old site, and I was actually in the email list that Mark McYoung had, which is called the Animal List. And there was a bunch of people on there, like Mark McYoung, Alan Barry, Storm Christensen, and so on. And at one point in time, Lauren asked a question about an Aikido technique. And I just happened to have an Aikido video. And I said, look, if you like, I can send it to you, because I know it's really well explained in this one. So I sent him that video. We got to talking a little bit via email. And he'd seen some of my stuff that I'd been writing on my site back then. And I said, would you like to write a book together? I was like, what? Me? And obviously I was very flattered and very intimidated at the same time. And Lauren first had me write an article for the police magazine that he was writing for about conditioning and for law enforcement. Did that, and I think he thought it was good enough to start writing a book together. And he basically showed me the ropes, taught me how to write instructional books, so nonfiction, how to write those for a martial arts and self-defense audience. And the joke that he once said is that at first I couldn't get you to write anything, and then now I can't get you to shut up because I was writing too much. So again, Lauren Christensen is my mentor. I learned so much from him. So if anything that I write or the videos that I make are helpful for somebody, thank him first. So without him, I wouldn't have been doing this. So we wrote our first book, The Fighter's Body, and then wrote a few more. And that was basically the start of my writing.
Yeah, I was just reading about The Fighter's Body. That was looks like, that looks like it would be a good, not just for martial artists, for anybody, anyone interested in fitness and getting healthy and losing weight.
I would say that, it's, most of it is still more than good enough for most people. Mm-hmm. Obviously, as sports science has evolved, as nutritional science has evolved, there's some things that are a little bit out of date.
Okay.
That's the only qualifier that I would give. I think overall the advice in there is pretty good. But, all this is the way science works. It evolves, it changes, and some things are left to the wayside that we're like, nope, this is actually not a good idea. And other things we discover like, yes, these are still the fundamentals. And that is I think the best way to view that book. I'm trying to think, but it's well over 20 years ago, I think, that I wrote that.
Oh, wow. Any thoughts of updating it and doing a new version 2.0?
Yes, I have a folder system for all my writing. Okay. And there's, I think, about 40 something ideas, projects, and books in some sort of state of development in there. Some are just at the idea state. Some have numerous chapters written already.
Wow.
But The Fighter's Body 2 is something that I would like to do. The only thing that is stopping me is the tremendous amount of research that I'd have to do. Mm-hmm. Because if you go in the back of the first one, you see a lot of resources and you see a lot of citations, like where does this research paper, where did that come from, which site did you find that, and so on. So there's a lot of work. Right. Research is a lot of work, and unfortunately, I just don't have the amount of time to do such an amount, to put a lot of time and effort into the in-depth research, because there's so much more information today than there was back then.
Right.
So it would be even more time consuming. And also it's, let's just say that that's not my favorite part of writing. Let's leave it at that.
I get that. Okay. Then how about the instructional and training videos? When did that start? When did you decide to start doing those?
Well, I did a few on my old website already, but just small stuff. Nothing. And again, just the bandwidth wasn't there to do high definition. High definition didn't even exist. So
yeah.
But then I got in touch with the people at Paladin Press, thanks to Lauren Christensen recommending me to them. Met up with the guys and made a proposal for the Combat Sancho series that I wrote. The proposal for, and they accepted it. And then we did a 3-part DVD series, so 3 big chapters. Both of them were multiple DVDs back then. So they told me that at that point in time, that was like the longest video shoot they'd ever done. So it's a lot of content. And I still, Paladin Press no longer exists. They stopped operating after the founder passed away, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But I still offer those. You can stream them from my Vimeo account, so people can still get those. So I did several with them,
okay,
and that was great. But then Paladin Press basically changed directions a little bit. I couldn't really follow completely. I wasn't sure how it would be, what would be the best way to proceed, and also that for them it was quite expensive because they had to fly me in from Brussels, so put me up in a hotel and so on. So that would be quite expensive every single time compared to having instructors from the US to fly in or drive in to record videos.
Right.
So there was a little bit of a logistical problem on that end. And then eventually I started doing stuff on YouTube a little bit more. And then about 5 years ago, I started my own Patreon. And there are hundreds and hundreds of videos on there now.
Nice.
I do about an hour and a half of videos for Patreon every month.
Oh, that's cool.
That's a fair amount.
Good.
Anything from Q&As to instructional videos to what I do a lot of is violence analysis. So we take footage of an actual, whether it's a street fight robbery or some kind of violent encounter that is caught on cell phone or on CCTV. And then I do an analysis of that and try to draw out the lessons that we can learn from that.
Okay, cool. And then how about the podcast? When did that idea pop into your head, and how did that start?
That's also a few years ago when podcasting became more popular. And I think there's the theme here. So if there's a new technology, I like to play with it and see what it would do. But also, eventually I figured out, like, okay, the good thing about writing is that it clarifies things that are in my head. And then obviously I can let people read that. But I write so much slower than I can talk. So it's a different way of getting thoughts out of my head and putting them out there. Hopefully that people find a use for them. And the background of that is that I spend a lot of time on the road going to clients because I don't have a home gym that I accept clients into, I don't have a gym that I go to, but I always go where the people live. So that means a lot of time on the road, a lot of time to listen, to think, and so on. So what I would do for a podcast episode is I'd have a topic, and just while I'm on the road, I'm just thinking things through. What do I think about this? Do I need to research something? Do I need to try this out in training, and so on? And then I write a script, and then I just talk about it on the podcast. And the other aspects, the interviews that I did, I try to do more of those, which is basically people that I find interesting, I talk to, and we have a talk. And the interviews are less strict now than they are before. Now it's more just a conversation, and I obviously do have some questions, but I'm more trying to get to know the person that I'm talking with, and just like as if I would meet them the first time, and we're having coffee or beer somewhere, and just talking about all sorts of things. I do try to stay on track, and that's why my patrons, they give me questions to ask for the bonus episode that I do with my guests. And that's a little bit more strict. That's like, okay, ask the questions to the guest and they respond. And
Right.
I just enjoy the talking with a bunch of people. It's just an excuse for me to meet a bunch of people that I normally wouldn't meet.
Yep.
And we hopefully have a good conversation, and I get to learn things, which is what I'm very much enjoying as well from podcasting.
Definitely. So is there a dream guest you haven't had on yet that you're hoping to get?
Not really. I have a long list of guests that I'd like to talk to.
Okay.
The biggest thing is I'm not Joe Rogan, so I don't have millions of people listening.
Yep.
And nowadays, I mean, the more you go for, let's say, higher profile guests, the more that you have to get through, let's call it their handlers or their agents or the people handling information requests. And then they send you a list of like, okay, so how many listeners do you have? Where will you promote this? How much money will you spend on promoting this podcast episode and so on? And that's not really how I operate. So
right.
I understand that nobody owes me anything. Nobody has to come on my podcast, but if the requirement for me to get one of these higher profile guests is like, well, you're going to have to pay X amount of dollars in promotional costs and so on, I'm like, that kind of defeats the purpose. One thing I did promise myself is that I would not put up money for all the stuff I do online.
Correct.
So I'm not going to pay for it myself. And I'm extremely fortunate that I have my patrons supporting me for all these years because that's what pays the bills, the web hosting, the podcast hosting, the software that I use to make the videos, to do all the technical things and so on. Because I know myself, if I don't hold myself to that standard, I would go broke just using all the cool equipment that I think I could buy and software and this and that. So there's a limit to what I'll do podcast wise, and I'm not going to start investing thousands of dollars to get this particular guest.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, don't sell yourself short, because I've been lucky. I've had some big names on mine, and I've only had to deal with like an assistant once or twice. A lot of the celebrities themselves manage their own social media, and often they will respond. I mean, I've had people who have been in like, Marvel and Star Wars stuff. I've had stars of, hit CBS TV series, and it's all been actually easy to get to them. People from the Karate Kid movies. I've only had 2 guests ever try to charge me. So
I'll go over your guest list and see if I can hit up some of those people.
Yeah.
Then,
and I noticed we've actually had a handful of the same guests.
Well, one of the most fun guests I think I had, which would be more high profile, would be Mark Dacascos.
I just saw his name in there. I'll have to chat with you because he's one I've been trying to get.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
I mean, and everybody, I know some people in Hollywood, and everybody's the same thing. He's just this awesome guy, very humble.
Yep.
He still trains very hard. It's very impressive, and just a wonderful person. I just literally, as you said it, I just scrolled on his name, and he's one of my dream guests. He's one I've wanted to have for a while. So he's great, and he's obviously very busy.
Yes.
Because when I first contacted him, I think it was almost a year later when we finally managed to sit down and talk. So he's extremely busy, as obviously all these actors are. So that's normal, and I don't mind. Obviously, it's
worth the wait. I've had 2 that I've had to wait though. Don the Dragon Wilson took me almost a year and a half to get, and same with Barry. Barry was quite a while. He was very busy too, and it just happened to work out one time that we did it. And with Barry, it was probably about a year and a half or more. So.
Yeah, he's crazy busy. I know that.
But no, I mean, that's congrats on the success so far. I mean, it's a lot of great guests, and I'm definitely gonna be listening to more, and we'll have to keep it. And like I said, any of my guests you want to reach out to, let me know. I'll gladly put you in touch with them. And
cool, thanks. I'll take a look.
Yeah.
And the thing that I found this, and it's true with anything on the internet, with blogging, podcasting, and so on, is just to keep going and not wait for like the big break or anything.
Yes.
Just keep going. I can't tell you how many of the blogs that I read like 15 years ago, really big followings, loads and loads of people visiting the blog every day. And that was before social media was actually got really big. You could see it in the comments section. They had tons of comments and so on. And some people would put hit counters on their websites, on their blog posts. Like you could see how many people had actually liked or shared that blog post. And I had a tiny blog in comparison. They're gone. there are so many of them that are just disappeared.
Yep.
Maybe my stuff will not be the most popular ever, but I'll just keep going for as long as I can, and mostly as long as I enjoy it.
Yeah,
that's the big thing. Is it needs to be fun, because life's too short to not do a bunch of stuff that you really don't want to do.
As long as you're enjoying it, that's the most important thing. And when other people can enjoy it also, that's just a bonus.
Yeah, I agree.
So I know, you've talked about, you teach MMA and stuff. And so I'm just curious on your thoughts on like the UFC and MMA now. Is that something, are you more of a fan of old school UFC, like from the early 90s, or what has become today?
The thing is that this is a young man's sport, so that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're young, you want to do crazy stuff and so on.
Yep.
So I did my share of crazy fights and so on. So it's not really that I disagree or anything. I very much understand that. But when you look at it from the perspective of professional athlete, longevity is an issue. And in combat sports, on average, if you can get to a 15-year long career, that's pretty good.
Yes.
Now I do know, yes, you've got people in the UFC that are 40 and beyond, and who are still competitive. Yes, but overall that is more the exception than the rule. So let's say that if you start competing when you're 20, let's say that's when your professional career starts. If you can go to 35, that's about the time where you will see that conditioning wise, speed wise, and so on, things will start to slow down. Now you have a ton of experience, obviously, but it's going to be difficult to keep up with guys 10, 15 years younger than you, just physically speaking. And then if we look at the very early UFCs, the rules that were used back then, we would see some very horrible fights now that end really badly. Mm-hmm. If with the level of training and conditioning that exists now, and then you see guys who are in tremendous shape start fighting under the rules from back then, I think we'd see a lot of injuries. You see it a little bit in bare knuckle boxing, where obviously they can only fight using the fists. But I mean, look at how some of these guys are cut up and bruised and so on. The bruises that tends to heal and so on, but you don't want to end up with a truckload of scars on your face. Or maybe you do, but as a sport, it's not something that I think long term is good for you. So. Right. I think it all had its place. Yeah. The first 10 years of the UFC, we saw a very big evolution from just brawling in the first few events to, let's say, more or less professional people who started to slowly emerge. And then bit by bit, we saw the dominance of the Gracie family go away a little bit, where everybody else would catch up with the grappling. Mm-hmm. And then we now get to the point where there's professionals who actually start learning MMA in an MMA gym. They don't start from a wrestling base and then they do boxing and then they do Muay Thai. They learn MMA from the get-go, meaning if you study Muay Thai, it's great. I trained in it myself, so it's a great combat sport. But not all the techniques are adapted to the MMA rule set. So you have to change them a little bit. You have to tweak them. Doing so takes time to figure all that out. Well, now we have coaches who've already done that. 20 years ago, that wasn't the case. Yeah. The UFC is about 30 years old now. Mm-hmm. So let's say 25 years ago, that wasn't the case. You had Muay Thai guys who would enter, but they then didn't have the groundwork. They didn't have the BJJ and so on. You'd have wrestlers enter or boxers, but they didn't have the other aspects of the fight. So that's very different nowadays. And I think the rule set as it is now, with the gloves and so on, and certain techniques not being allowed, I think it's a good thing. Let's say the one thing that makes a big difference is a soccer kick to the head on a downed opponent, right? Where you can kick somebody in the face. For the people who forget, look at the old Pride competition, Pride in Japan. That was like in the 90s. They allowed that.
Stomping.
Yeah, that's a totally different kind of fight that you see. Mm-hmm. And if you just want to go for brutal, okay, then that's the rule set for you. I think as a sport, it has more of a future the way it is now.
Right.
So I'm a fan. I mean, I watch the fights. My son does BJJ, so he and my daughter likes it too. So we often watch the fights, the three of us.
That's cool. All right. So in all your years of martial arts, almost 40 years of martial arts, is there one philosophy that stands out? It just rises to the top of your list. You keep coming back to it?
This is kind of let's say the motto is not maybe the best way to describe it, but this is kind of overall philosophy of what I do, and I call it Randy's law, and that means the differences are just as important as the similarities. And Randy Brannon, and I've got a link on, I've got an article on my blog about Randy's law, and basically he's a very, very smart person. And he talked in an email on Mark McYoung's email list many years ago about the physics involved with sword fighting. And one of the things he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing because it's easier to explain it that way, that when you look at Filipino styles, they often use the stick as like this universal weapon. I don't know if you've practiced Filipino martial arts.
Very little, just some seminars, nothing in depth.
So then what they often have is a numered system of striking angles. Let's say from right high to left low would be angle number 1. From left high to right low would be angle number 2, and so on. Now, when you learn to do these angles, depending on the system, there might be 9 or 10 or 12 or more, it doesn't matter. And then if you can do them with a stick, you can also do them with a sword, with a machete, with a knife, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So the stick is often used as a training weapon, as a universal stand-in for these other weapons. But one of the things Randy pointed out there was that is true. However, the differences between each weapon are just as important as the similarities. And that means that, for instance, if you use a stick against a machete, the machete will bite into the wood. Now, yes, we can start talking about different hardness of wood and so on. So the type of wood that you use, but that just proves the point, because different types of wood also have different characteristics. So the differences matter. And that is something that for me was like a flashbulb moment where I latched on to that. So I always look at what is different. What do I already know? What is different? And what do I already know is something that is very difficult to answer sometimes, because you might see superficial similarities that upon later examination turn out to be not the case. And this coincided with not that long after I would read an article, and that was an interview with a Chinese martial arts teacher who would practice, I think, 6 or 7 styles. And the interviewer asked him, okay, how can you keep them all separate in your head? And how can you learn all those styles? And he says, that's very easy. Don't learn the same thing twice, which is the same thing as Randy's law, but stated differently.
Right.
And I very much disagree when people say a punch is just a punch, or there are only so many ways that you can, punch or kick, or do a front kick, or do a cross, or do a reverse punch. I very much disagree with that, because the differences are just as important as the similarities. You can have a karate guy punch you. You can have a boxer punch you. You can have a Muay Thai guy punch you. Have a Kung Fu guy punch you. And all they do is throw the right straight punch from a left lead. They're all going to be different. They have different purposes. They do different goals, different body mechanics with their own strengths and weaknesses, and so on. So for me, that's the nuance is where it lies. That's where the knowledge lies. It's not difficult to look for the similarities. There are some caveats there. There are some traps that you're supposed to avoid. But overall, the main aspect is trying to figure out, okay, what is different? What is new for me? And I think that is the best way to keep on learning. So whenever I see something, I try to figure out, okay, what can I learn from this? What is different from what I do, and why? And that's the big question, why? Not just like, okay, we do it this way. Why? Well, because. No, that's not an answer. You need to know why you're doing things.
Right. That's a great answer. I love that. So who are 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
It's a little bit difficult for me to answer that question, because I was never all that much into idolizing people.
Okay.
Not even as a kid. I would have some posters on my wall as a teenager, but not that much. Mostly because they looked cool, but not that, I had one from Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street. Not that he was my idol, but that was a scary poster, and I was into horror movies.
That's
just
cool.
to give you an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say Mount Rushmore, it wouldn't necessarily be like, for me, these are the best people ever in martial arts, but they were very influential for me. I think they deserve recognition.
Okay.
So the first would obviously be Lauren Christensen.
Nice.
Because obviously he's written so many books that are like excellent material. He's been there, done that. Law enforcement, MP in Vietnam. I mean, I don't know. I forget how many black belts he has. He's an excellent martial artist. He has a tremendous amount of real life violence experience. He's a scholar. He's very smart. He has an excellent sense of humor, which is also very nice when you meet somebody like that. At the same time, he's very humble. And I think he should get more credit than he gets.
Okay.
I think he's written a tremendous amount of very influential books that maybe because that some of them are a little bit older, that people forget how influential they were at that point in time and still are today. But that's just me. And obviously I'm biased because I learned so much from him personally.
Right.
And I consider, and obviously he's a friend also. So that would be my number one pick. The second would be Dan Doherty, which is the unfortunately late head instructor of the Tai Chi style that I teach. He was a very interesting man of Scottish descent. Started with karate and then went to Hong Kong to learn Tai Chi. He was a police officer there. Did a fair amount of real world violence. Mm-hmm. That he worked vice. He worked a bunch of different things in the police force there. Competed full contact in Asia and basically had a Tai Chi Chuan style that is actually practical, that you can use for self-defense, as opposed to what most people think Tai Chi is just a walking, meditation and so on, which is by far not the case. It's Tai Chi Chuan. Chuan means fist and is basically the way that in Chinese martial arts you would categorize a martial art. The fist of Tai Chi, the fist of this, the fist of that. So that's so it's Tai Chi Chuan. It's not Tai Chi that I do and that he taught. But Dan had a law degree. He would fluently read and write Mandarin and Cantonese. He would translate very old Chinese texts and poetry, and he could kick your ass. Nice. But also, he was very outspoken. When something was wrong, he was not afraid to say it. But he always treated me great. He's very kind and friendly and generous to me. And he was by far, physically speaking, one of the most impressive martial artists that I've ever worked with and actually crossed hands with. There's stuff that he did that I, to this day, can't replicate.
Wow.
I just don't know how he did that, and I can't do it to other students. Some of the highest level of martial arts that I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, he passed away not that long ago. So, but he definitely deserves to be on that Mount Rushmore of mine. Okay. And then one more person would be Bob Orlando. He was my Kung Tao teacher, also passed away a few years ago. I was very fortunate to get to know Bob on a personal level, not just as a teacher, but also, again, having as my friend. And he was an excellent teacher. Bob was very methodical. He was a programmer. He was very logical, very structured, and so on. So... And he would say, he'd make the joke that his spontaneity came by rote, which is a contradiction in terms. But the way his mind worked, the way he could break things down, analyze them, and then create a curriculum to teach something. If I'm anything as a teacher, much of it is thanks to Bob's influence, because he showed me how you can set a very high standard of teaching and how you can create a curriculum, a system of martial arts or self-defense in a certain way, which is very difficult to do well. And I think this is something that is worth studying. The other aspect to Bob is that he was, for instance, a very religious man, but he never imposed it on me or anybody else. We talked about it, but I said, look, that's not me. And he was perfectly fine with that. He was just a very generous person and always just willing to help, just trying to help out. And as well, mind you, you shouldn't have to come up to him with nonsense, because he would tell you to your face that you were full of it. But very politely, but he didn't suffer fools gladly. But he was very polite, but very straight and straightforward as well. And again, it's the personality part, but also the martial arts skill, obviously. But most of it for me was learning to be a better teacher. That's thanks to him.
Nice. Okay, that's a great Mount Rushmore.
That would be the three I would put up there. Perfect.
All right, I got a few fun questions to wrap it up. Now, this one, you can't pick one of your own. A favorite martial arts book?
That's difficult because there's so many that I've read.
Yep. If you want to name two or three, that's okay.
Yeah, my library is in the other room, because otherwise I could just quickly take a glance at at some of them. I think solo training by Lauren Christensen would be one of them.
Okay.
Because this is one of the reasons why Lauren and I, we get along so well, is I like to do solo training too. So does he.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't. And I think this is the difference with a lot of people, is that they just train in class, and you can train hard there,
yep.
but then that's it. And you have to do like 4 or 5 classes a week then, if you really want to advance.
Mm-hmm.
Most people have 1 or 2 classes a week, I think. Now, I would come home after my class and I would keep training, because I was afraid that I would forget, because I don't learn easily. I learn better now, but back then I was just a beginner. So I was like, I want to get better. I want to be better than I am now. So I would train by myself, and I still do. So definitely there. And I think it's a book that is extremely helpful for many people. And then the other one, which I think is an important work, is Dan Doherty's Complete Tai Chi Chuan.
Okay.
Which he covers all aspects of Tai Chi in general, and in particular the art that he taught and that I also teach. And there's some of the stuff that people disagree with, and that it's fine. There's some of the historical stuff and so on. There are some things in there that I know why he wrote that in there and who he's talking about. And if you're not really in the Tai Chi scene, you won't know, or you might mistakenly think you do, and so on. So that is also a fair criticism that people might have. But overall, it is an excellent work to give you a good idea of okay, what is the art actually about? What are all the different aspects? And then some more context about Chinese society, Chinese language, culture, and so on, which is very important to understand if you practice the art. I still regularly open the book and page through it and reread certain things. And I've had it for well over, I think, 20 years now.
Okay. I'm definitely going to look at the solo training one, because I'm one too. Like when I was younger, I always had 2-3 friends I could count on to train at any time. But as get older and people get married and have lives, it's hard. So solo training is is important. I know when I was in my 20s, we had about 4 of us that we'd go to class 3 to 4 days a week, or sometimes 5 more days a week. But then we'd stay after class. The instructor would give us a key and say, "Lock up when you're done," and we'd stay after class another 3 hours and do training. So yeah,
and that's how you advance. I mean, it's one of the things that I find that if you're really into it, it's not a hardship. Nobody has to tell you to train.
Yeah,
you just do it. You want to get better. You're enthusiastic. You're very much it's bitten. It's chewed a part of your soul basically, and taken its place. Like, okay, this is my thing. This is what I need to be doing in life. And if you're at that point, nobody ever had to tell me to train harder. Right. There was no need. I would do that all by myself.
That's cool. All right. How about a favorite martial arts video game? Were you ever a gamer?
Oh yeah, I'm still a gamer. I don't have enough time to do that, but actually, martial arts, does a fight game count?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, that would be Marvel versus Capcom.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because I used to be a huge comic book fan, very much a fan of Wolverine. Back in the day when I was a teenager, I would buy the comics. I still have them somewhere in storage.
Nice.
And he was my favorite character to play with.
Okay.
I would pretty much win with that character. And it's just, so I remember playing the very first Street Fighter game in the arcades. That was a revolutionary thing back then. And it was very simple. I mean, the one I played still had the huge buttons on the machine that you had. The harder you slammed down on the button, the harder your character punched.
Yep.
Then afterwards, they had normal buttons that you could just tap and get the right kind of punch or kick. So that was my experience, and I thought it was awesome.
Oh yeah.
But then you see the evolution to what it is now, and you have like combo, counter, combo breaker. You have all these different keystrokes and combinations you have to remember. Same thing with Mortal Kombat that my son's he had it on his PlayStation. I'm like, this is too complex for me.
Yeah.
Like and Marvel versus Capcom was kind of like the balance for me. Like, okay, I can remember this stuff and still enjoy the game.
Yeah.
And obviously, superheroes, that was fun.
I know. I miss just having a joystick and a button.
Yeah.
So much simpler and so much more fun those days. But so
you're right.
So as a Wolverine fan, are you excited then for Deadpool 3? We get to see Wolverine again.
I took my kids to the first Deadpool movie in the cinema, and I laughed so hard because there were some scenes that I knew what they were talking about, and they didn't because they never read the comics, and I just laughing my ass off.
Yeah,
and they enjoyed it too, and since then, there's this cartoon of Deadpool where it says it's like a cartoon version of him with his swords, and it says maximum effort. So for years, I've been sending that via Messenger to my kids when they have exams or something. Like
nice.
Maximum effort.
That's cool.
So huge fan. Not quite sure how much training Hugh Jackman can still do at his age to look ripped, but I saw that he has the yellow costume now.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it's kind of hidden. So we'll see. I like the first one. Second one was also great.
Yep.
So I hope that they can still have the same vibe to the third one.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to it. So, all right. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Let me think. But I watched Into the Badlands a while ago, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
There was some stuff, with the writing that eventually I was like,
Yeah.
I have Warrior. I have on my list, but I haven't started it yet.
Another great show.
Just a matter of time. And I'm trying to think back because I haven't watched that many the last few years. Not quite sure which one I'd pick then.
Okay. Any as a kid that stand out that you watched?
Well, I did watch the original Kung Fu series back then, but I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And it just now that David Carradine was not the greatest martial artist ever.
No.
He actually has a Tai Chi video out that is horrible.
Yeah, I saw that.
Anyway, and they did a lot of slow motion stuff to hide the fact that he wasn't a great martial artist.
Yes.
But that was fun. If we can add in anime.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I really enjoyed the Knights of the Zodiac.
Okay.
And I recently saw the movie that they made out of it, the live action movie with Mark Dacascos, who has a small part in it.
Okay.
Very different from the anime, but that was fun, and I watched that very much as a kid. And then Fist of the North Star. That was my favorite.
Okay.
Very, very blood and guts and gore, but just the whole mythology that was into the martial arts. Complete nonsense, obviously, not realistic at all, but it had this very nice mythology and the way everything was set up, and just this big quest that Kenshiro was on to find his loved one and so on. I enjoyed that a lot.
Okay, good. How about a favorite martial arts movie?
That would have to be The Matrix.
Okay.
I know it's a little bit older. I know it's not fully martial arts, but I remember seeing that movie in the theaters, and it was like the scene in which Neo, one of the first times, is plugged back in again, and Lawrence Fishburne's character says, "Welcome to the desert of the real." And there's just total silence in the theater. It's like, oh my God. And then it's like, okay. And he starts training. It's like, I know Kung Fu. Show me. And again, people have to know, like nowadays it looks maybe antiquated, but back then just special effects were like, oh my God, awesome.
Yeah.
That was like unheard of. And I really liked it because I think it's Yu Wen-ping is the fight choreographer.
Yes.
Who worked on a lot of the Hong Kong movies. And you could see his influence in there. And clearly the actors were not, trained martial artists, but it did spend months in training and rehearsal. And I think they did a good job. And it was a good balance between basically the world that was created, the science fiction world that was created, and then blending in something very traditional like the martial arts they would portray.
Nice.
And overall, just a great story.
Yes. Cool. All right. Final question. Now, this one doesn't have to be a martial arts movie, just a favorite movie fight scene.
Oh God, there's so many. There's so many. I have to think now. See if I'm not blanking on anything. I wouldn't say favorite because it's always difficult to have an absolute favorite.
Right.
But there's a bunch of fight scenes in the second Blade movie that I really liked, and the one at the end where Wesley Snipes fights Nomak, I think is a character, And just the whole setup, working towards the end, and he was getting basically his ass beat before, so they're like, how's he going to do that? And the special effects weren't great. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit of a downer, but overall, I enjoyed it a lot. I love vampire stuff, movies, books, and so on. So I very much enjoy those. And I think Wesley Snipes is the best Blade ever. I know, what's his name? Mahershala Ali is apparently going to take over the character, but that movie seems to be in limbo now. So who knows what's going to happen with Marvel movies?
Yeah, he's a good actor. I just wish they would have picked a martial artist.
Yeah, but that scene for me it's a really fun fight scene. It's just over the top, but still, has the right amount of tension. And so, again, it's a personal favorite of mine. Okay. I'm sure I can think of others, but
hey, that's a good pick. I like it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, before I let you go, is there anything that maybe I forgot to ask you, or you want to make sure we mention before we wrap it up?
Not really. I think we covered quite a bit of ground. I hope the listener enjoyed us talking. If they want to see the blog, it's wimsblog.com, and there you can find all my social media stuff and so on. I'm fairly active on social media. If people are interested in the Tai Chi that I do have a membership site. It's called onlinetaichichuan.com, and that is basically the closest thing to being in class with me. I teach the way that I teach beginners. I think there's over 100 videos on there right now. Wow. So the point that I try to make is that I'm always very happy when somebody reads something that I do or watches a video or whatever, and they're like, okay, this is helpful. And if I can do that, then I'm happy. I will never be able to travel the world and see tens of thousands of people like, let's say, Danny Nosanto has done in his lifetime.
Right.
But I can hopefully reach more people with my writing and videos and so on.
That's cool.
So if anybody's interested, it's fine. And if not, that's great. I mean, if people totally disagree with everything I said to you today, that is fine too. It's a very big world, and more than one thing can be true at the same time. So that is fine.
Definitely. And I'll put links out there for all your stuff also when the episode comes out. But I've so enjoyed this. Like I said, Barry recommended you, and I'm glad he did. I love your story. I love how you explain things, and I'm definitely going to check out some of your books, and I'm probably going to also reach out to Lauren as a possible guest too. He's a good suggestion there, so I might reach out to him. But I've enjoyed this so much, and I can't wait till the episode comes out.
That'll be great. Me too. And I'll make sure that I'll let everybody know that we talked. I haven't done that many podcast interviews the last few years. So this was refreshing for me to be on the other side of the microphone. That was fun.
I always enjoy it. I love talking martial arts, and it's good hearing other versions and other people's ideas and thoughts, and that's why I keep doing this.
Excellent.
All right, you have yourself a good day.
Okay, you too, Ryan. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.